All right, welcome to another episode of the Middle-Aged Metalhead. It's been a while. Last upload was back in December, I think, so it's been a good 3.5 months. And I thought I'd gently ease myself back into the vlogosphere with a thread that I've been seeing going around quite a while now. And a little late to the party, but yeah, I saw a lot of interesting videos around this topic, so I figured why not? So this is my 20 albums that changed my life. A little hyperbolic, but yeah, generally albums that had a big impact on me through the years, and things that or albums that basically uh, changed or kind of set me on the path to explore more and more music. So starting off, I think my earliest musical memory from maybe around the time that I was about 7, 8 years old. Sundays were spent with my dad listening to records on his turntable. There was the Beatles, probably the first rock and roll band I've ever heard. There was the first Deep Purple album. There was Jimi Hendrix Best Of. There was the Guess Who, American Woman. And there was Alice Cooper's School's Out. This title song and this album just absolutely blew my mind back then, right? Especially the title song. I mean, it was just about the most rebellious thing I'd ever heard. School's out for summer, and when Alice goes, school's been blown to pieces, it was just wow. Did he actually say that? And over the years, it still continues to be one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums, along with Killer. But yeah, school's out. And this is pretty much what set me on the path to rock music and then just over the years, heavier and heavier music. Next, sometime in the early 90s, I think, came across this compilation cassette on Music India Limited called Sizzling Metal. It had a really not a lot of metal on it. There was Cream Sunshine of Your Love. There was Hendrix's Purple Haze. But the album actually opened with Sweetleaf from Black Sabbath's third album, Master of Reality. And that opening cough, that opening riff just absolutely grabbed me. And easily my all time favorite Sabbath album. And if you were to talk about a Sabbath best of, this album is it really. Just look at the songs on this: Sweet Leaf, After Forever, Children of the Grave, Lord of this World, Solitude, Into the Void, and then the two instrumentals, Orchid and Embryo. But damn, this is one classic album. Then, still in the early 90s, there used to be this British tabloid called The Sun, which used to have an Indian edition. And in one of those editions, there was this band called Iron Maiden that was publicizing their new album. This was probably around 92, 93. Long haired dudes standing in front of an abandoned castle, dressed in jeans and leather jackets. And it was just like, I wanted to listen to that. I didn't care what genre it was. I had no idea what genre they were. I'd never heard the band before, but the imagery was so cool that, yeah, after a lot of convincing, my parents managed to get me the CD back then, which was a really big deal in 1992. And the CD's somewhere around the place, but this is Iron Maiden, Fear of the Dark. And back then, this was easily one of the most dark, evil sounding albums I'd ever heard. Till then it was I was listening to Guns N' Roses, I was listening to Def Leppard, and Europe. Europe was huge, but Maiden's Fear of the Dark just absolutely blew my mind. And after this, things just kept getting heavier. Also around 92, maybe 93, I came across Metallica's Black album. Absolutely loved it. And then a friend who was a few years older than me told me that that was their sellout album, and I should actually listen to Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning. So again, got Master of Puppets on tape, and wow, just wow. This one is an all-time favorite album. You could say that maybe Ride the Lightning is the better album musically, and sometimes I think that maybe it is Ride the Lightning. Sometimes it's Master of Puppets for me. But just in terms of the kind of impact it had on me when I was, what, 14, 13, 14 years old, just massive. And even today, I mean, Battery, Master of Puppets, The Thing That Should Not Be, Welcome Home, Disposable Heroes, which I think is one of the greatest thrash metal songs ever written, Leper Messiah, Orion, the instrumental, Damaging. This is just one classic album. Then moving on to junior college, I must have been about 15, 16 years old. Things were progressing in the sense that I was listening to a lot more heavier music, thrash metal, just getting into Sepultura and a little bit of death metal here and there. And the friend who told me to check out Master of Puppets had a couple of CDs for sale, right? So I'm like, okay, let's get this. And the first of them, Napalm Death Peel Sessions. Now, I'd never heard anything like this, right? I heard Fito, I think, a couple of years after I heard this. Scum came much, much later because it wasn't available here. No one had it on cassette or CD or anything, any format really. But Peel Sessions, wow, I had seriously never heard anything like this, and I don't know if you can see the track listing, but yeah, much later I did pick up the Earache vinyl, and just an absolutely murderous album, and put me on the path to even heavier death metal and grindcore and everything else that came along with Napalm Death. Just a brilliant gateway to extreme music. On that same day, along with Napalm Death's Peel Sessions, the other CD he was selling was Paradise Lost Icon. And just wow, Nick Holmes' vocals on this, Macintosh's guitar playing, the whole freaking band. I mean, this is till date my favorite Paradise Lost album, and this would be in my top 10 Paradise Lost albums of all time. No, sorry, my top 10 albums of all time. Just a fantastic doom metal album. And this was also the first time I seriously tried to imitate somebody singing or growling. And God, I sucked at it, right? Trying to copy Ember's Fire and trying to sound like Nick Cave and what at 15, 16 years old, wondering why I sounded so terrible. But yeah, this is just a phenomenal album and still sounds magnificent. Then, a lot of people are going to say only the demos are real. And I guess it is true for some bands, but one album where it is much better than the demo, as much as people would like to say otherwise. The first Deicide. After Maiden and after a lot of death metal, when I first heard this, I'd still never heard anything as just dark and evil as this first Deicide album. Even everything else that came up by Deicide, right? Whether it was Legion, whether it was Once Upon the Cross, Nothing just captured the sinister vibe that this first album had. And speaking of demos, of course, Amon Feasting the Beast, and I think a lot of the same songs ended up on the first album as well, but I'd still prefer that full length debut to the demos. And of course, back then, Benton was a death metal hero, right? I mean, he was up there with Shaldina and Reifert and all of these guys, and he was a certified nut job, branding himself with an upside down cross on his forehead, telling everyone he was going to kill himself by the time he was 32. And yeah, it just turned out he was talking shit like most young people do, but this album, man, what a rush. And till today, it just holds up phenomenally well. Deicide, Deicide. Then around this maybe came in a couple of years later, maybe around the mid 90s, 94, 95, because I remember I was in junior college and bands were talking about, I mean, local bands were talking about covering the title song, although no one ever did. But yeah, Alice in Chains, Dirt. And this came right at the height of the whole grunge explosion, right? And it was almost like you were compelled at that time to hate on bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And Nirvana's okay, Pearl Jam's first album is okay, but I was never a huge fan of those bands. But Alice in Chains, I'm not sure if I heard Facelift first or Dirt first. Most likely it was Dirt. But yeah, this is just one hell of a trip. I mean, just a fantastic album. It's heavy, it's dark, it's still got catchy songs, Lane Staley's vocals, just wow. Then around the same time, I was getting into death metal, and one of my favorite albums from that time, the mid 90s, 95, 96, 97, Cannibal Corpse, The Bleeding. I'd liked the first three albums, I still like them a lot, but this was the Corpse album that really got to me. The gore, the lyrics, just the catchy grooves, the huge choruses. I know it sounds weird for a death metal band, but man, these songs had some massive choruses. Things like Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead, Stripped, Raped, Strangled, The Bleeding. Just a fantastic album. Then, next up, heading on to the late 90s, and this was, I would think, something that played in my car on cassette for I don't know how long. It was just non-stop, and that's Ministry, Psalm 69. This was just, yeah, absolutely fantastic stuff. NWO, Just One Fix, Jesus Built My Hot Rod, Scarecrow. I mean, brilliant, brilliant album. And I used to have a little canary yellow 800cc car back then, and with a tape player, and the dubbed cassette for Psalm 69 was stuck in the tape player. So this was the only album I literally could hear for a long time till I got my lazy ass to take this to the, and get that tape player fixed. But yeah, never regretted it. Never a dull moment with Psalm 69. Next, I think again around the late 90s, maybe, yeah, I think this album came out in 95. So I must have heard it around 97, 98. and just getting into my bachelor's degree or starting off. And one of dad's friends was coming back from the States, and I'd asked him to get me, yeah, as usual, a metal CD. That was one of the only ways you could get metal CDs back then, unless uh, apart from the few shops in town. And he said that this was the rage in the US, and this was what the record store guy recommended to him. Astro Creep 2000 by White Zombie. This was another just fantastic album. I mean, I love this album to death. Last Exorcist was good. It's got some really great moments, but this album is just from start to finish is just banger after banger. And maybe not something that um, a lot of people have heard these days. Maybe it's a little overlooked, but yeah, this is an album I still have a whole lot of time for. And this, along with Ministry, really set me off on finding more bands that had a industrial bed, and that's where it took off. Godflesh and things like that came along later, along with also bands like Prong and a lot of those early 90s, mid 90s bands, right from, yeah, Prong, Helmet, all of those bands. But Ministry and White Zombie, just, yeah, important bands growing up. Along the same time with all of the death metal and the doom and the, what would you call Ministry and White Zombie, 90s alt metal, maybe, or whatever you wanted to call it. It was also the time for black metal. I think the first black metal album I ever heard was Marduk's Those Are the Unlight. I still have that cassette somewhere, dubbed from a CD. Those Are the Unlight on one side, and I think Heaven Shall Burn on the other side. So it must have been the late 90s, and Marduk was good, but generally it felt like, without really having a concept of what black metal was, it just felt like death metal with poor production and really thin guitar tones. And then I heard Immortal's Blizzard Beast, and this album just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. Particularly the mid album highlight, Mountains of Might. I think, yeah, song number 6 on the album. Just absolutely fantastic. And this was my gateway into the entire second wave of black metal, I guess, whether it was coming from Norway, Sweden, everywhere else. This was the album that really opened my ears up to them. Along with that, of course, was also Darkthrone's Transylvanian Hunger. Now, I'd heard Soulside Journey before and absolutely loved it. And then when I heard this immediately after Soulside, I had no reference again to the change that had happened to their sound. And it was like, what the fuck is going on here? But I kept at it, listened to it, and one day it just clicked, like that. And yeah, Transylvanian Hunger, along with Blaze in the Northern Sky, and what was and that third album, whatever it's called now, which I'm completely blanked out on. But yeah, this one, along with Blizzard Beasts, and I'd say Marduk's Those Are the Unlight as well, just opened my ears up for more and more black metal adventures. Then jumping ahead to the early 2000s, right? I'd started working. I think Bangalore or India had just moved from dial-up internet to what would you call it, broadband or whatever it was called back then. And file sharing was starting to come into the picture around 2000, 2001. And one of the first bands randomly that a friend downloaded and gave to me was Acid Bath, When the Kite String Pops. Now, this is, I mean, if you know, you know, right? It's a sludge metal classic, and Dax Riggs is, I would say, one of the greatest vocalists of all time. And this is basically, if you like that whole I Hate God, Crowbar, Down kind of sound, the two Acid Bath albums are absolutely essential. And this one, I mean, it was the songs, it was the lyrics, it was Dax's vocals, finger paintings of the insane, Scream of the Butterfly. Oh, God, what a fantastic album. Then we have a friend of mine went to the UK and he came back with two CDs. The first was Venom's Black Metal. This was again maybe around 99 2000. I was still in college and we'd never heard black metal before because it just wasn't available here. And the other was Misfits Collection 1. And I'd heard the Pistols, I'd heard Clash's Combat Rock, I'd heard bits of punk rock here and there. And it was all fine, but it never really grabbed me until I heard the Misfits. And this is just wow. I mean, you could say start with Walk Among Us or start with any one of their classic albums, but if you've never heard the Misfits before, start with this. It's called Collection One. It's kind of like a best of, and it really has everything that you need. She, Hollywood Babylon, Bullet, Horror Business, Teenagers from Mars, Night of the Living Dead, I Turned into a Martian, Skulls, London Dungeon. I could just go on and on. Classic, classic band, and this is where I guess I really started exploring punk and hardcore and all of the other genres that came with it. But yeah, this was basically my gateway into punk. Then, around the same time, one of the most gruesome, noisy, lo fi albums that ever heard that absolutely just destroyed my brain. Impetigo Ultimo Mondo Cannibal. This is death metal, but with a punkish energy, and they grind like no one's business. You could say, what was the album with I Work for the Street Cleaner, Horror of the Zombies? Yeah, you could say that that album is an easier listen, but man, this album just is a rush. It's an absolute rush. And again, by then, the same friend who'd put me on the path with Master of Puppets and Paradise Lost and Napalm Death Peel Sessions, he'd started a distro. And this is an album that I got from him sometime in, I don't know, maybe the early 2000s. Actually, I got that Immortal from him as well. So, yeah, damn. Then this was one band that I'd heard a lot about, read a lot about, particularly this album, because we used to get copies of old issues of Metal Hammer and Terrorizer. And I think when this album dropped in the 90s, whenever that was, uh, I remember a photocopied edition of a Terrorizer magazine with albums of the year from that year and from Metal Hammer as well. And both those magazines had rated this album very highly. If not at number one, I think it was easily in the top 10. And the description, the reviews, they all sounded very, very cool. But I only actually got this after broadband, so it must have been 2000, early 2000s again. And finally got this on vinyl a few years ago. Neurosis through Silver and Blood. Again, one of my all time favorite bands, one of my all time favorite albums. Just a fantastic, dark, heavy piece of work. Magnificent stuff. And along the way, a few more to go, I guess. Although now that I'm sitting here talking about these, I feel like I've missed out on a whole bunch of albums, and the focus has mainly been on heavy music. But yeah, I could talk for hours about the first time I heard "Thick as a Brick," which we'll get to sometime later, or I guess the first time I heard "Lamb Lies Down" on Broadway. But yeah, that's for another video. But again, sometime in the early 2000s, this was a huge album, just absolutely huge. Nevermore, over the years, I feel like they don't quite get the credit that they should. I mean, an incredible band. Waddle Dane was a fantastic vocalist and at his prime, a fantastic lyricist as well. You had Jeff Loomis on guitar, you had Van Williams on drums on this album, you had Tim Calvert, who also played on I think the first two Forbidden albums, if I'm not wrong, and of course Jim Shepard from Sanctuary on bass. And this album, man, this is just prime melodic. Uh, you could call it thrash. You could call it a whole bunch of things, but Nevermore was just Nevermore. You know, they never really fit into any kind of bracket. And it's dark, emotional, heavy, heavy music backed up with Dane's absolutely amazing vocals. And Dreaming Neon Black is just another one of those all-time favorite albums. Then, now, being mainly a 90s kid, I guess I missed out on the whole tape trading scene that I read so much about. But we did have CD trading scenes for a short time with people from all over the world. Sometimes it would be CDR trading, and sometimes it would be actual CD trading. But anyway, I'm kind of digressing here and just rambling on. But again, during the days of dial up internet, there used to be this website called LARM, LARM, named after, I think, a German industrial band. And that was also my gateway to a whole bunch of extreme metal because it was basically a review site. And one of those reviews was about this band called Sutcliffe Jugend, when pornography is no longer enough. And the review didn't really describe the music, but it did describe the feeling that the reviewer had when he was listening to this album. And it sounded pretty intense, so I was like, wonder what this band is all about. And sometime later, CD trading, I found somebody who was willing to trade this away. And yeah, the trade happened, and I got this again sometime in the early 2000s. And wow, just this was my first exposure to noise, power electronics, whatever you want to call it. No semblance of any kind of traditional music on here. And it was dark, it was depraved, deranged, call it what you will. But yeah, this is one amazing album. And also my gateway to noise and power electronics and Mersbo and White House and Genocide Organ and Condom and all of those artists and bands. I mean, just a phenomenal piece of work. Sutcliffe Jugend, when pornography is no longer enough. Then finally, last one for today. I think when Consider Dead came out, um, yeah, we all had it on tape, CD dub mostly, and it was a death metal classic, right? But then we never got the second album, or at least I never got the second album, and then I only uh, got into Gorguts again during the days of broadband, and it was like, oh, they're still around. That's cool. Download it, and I downloaded Obscura, and oh my god, this was just from the minute you press play or the minute I press play, I knew I was in for a wild ride, and this album just delivered. At that time, I was living in Bombay, and I remember this album being the soundtrack to late night local train journeys across the city, just on my Discman, headphones on, just put this on, and it would just drown everything else out. Just a phenomenal piece of work, one of the greatest death metal albums of all time. And yeah, I'll fight you on that. This is just absolutely fantastic. And that is pretty much that for today. I lost count of how many albums I was talking about, but I could have easily spoken about maybe 10 more. So, will there be a part two? I doubt it. And this video is kind of long in the tooth already. So, those were my 20-ish albums that changed my life, that made me discover more music from different genres, that put me on heavier and heavier paths. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. Although I have to say, I think every one of these albums came out before 99. So there hasn't really been anything post 2000s that I could say, really influenced me or changed my life in any way, which I guess makes sense because I am a 90s kid. And even today, it's most of what I listen to, most of my collection is albums and artists that I grew up with, right? Uh, very little space for newer artists. And yeah, I'm happy with that. So, signing off for now, stop rambling, and hopefully be a lot more regular with this. So, yeah, if you like what you see, leave a comment, tell me what albums changed your life, like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and stay safe, stay metal. Cheers.